Picture this. 30,000 years before Christ, on frozen steppes that would one day become the wine country of southern France, a man named Kra is having what might be the worst day of his hunting career. Actually, scratch that, he's having the worst day that will accidentally change the entire trajectory of human civilization. Kra drags his mangled leg through the snow, watching his tribemates disappear over a ridge in pursuit of woolly mammoths. His left femur, shattered 3 seasons earlier when a cave bear decided he looked like dinner, had healed at an angle that would make a modern orthopedic surgeon weep. The bone had fused crooked, leaving him with a limp that guaranteed he'd never again charge alongside the other hunters as they hurled their spears at creatures the size of small houses. Now, you have to understand what this meant in the Paleolithic world. Physical strength wasn't just an advantage, it was literally the difference between eating and starving, between status and exile, between passing on your genes and becoming a footnote in some cave bear's digestive system. The strongest hunters got the best portions of meat, the choicest mates, the warmest spots by the fire. Kra had gone from alpha male to fire tender, watching stronger men attempt what they'd been attempting for millennia, getting close enough to massive angry animals to stick them with pointed sticks. And here's where it gets interesting, because while those hunters are out there playing the ancient equivalent of extreme sports, Kra is sitting by the fire doing something that probably looked like the world's most boring hobby. He's carving, not the usual stuff, not tools or figurines or whatever passed for Paleolithic entertainment. He's making these strange wooden shapes, studying them with the intensity of a modern engineer, watching how they move through the air when he tosses them. See, Kra has something his able-bodied tribemates don't have. Time. Lots and lots of time. Time to notice things. Time to observe that when ravens fly overhead, they don't just flap their wings randomly. They angle their bodies, adjust their wing positions, manipulate air currents with a precision that makes human spear throwing look like, well, throwing sticks at elephants. But more importantly, Kra has noticed something about the human arm that nobody else seems to have caught on to. Our arms are pathetically short. Think about it. When you throw something, you're essentially using your arm as a lever, and the longer the lever, the more force you can generate. Basic physics. But evolution gave us these stubby little appendages that barely reach past our waists. Meanwhile, we're trying to kill animals that evolution gave armor plating, massive size, and really bad attitudes. The hunters return that evening bloodied and empty-handed. Again. The mammoth they'd been tracking had turned on them, scattering the hunting party like leaves in a windstorm. 3 men were injured, supplies were running low, and the tribe was starting to get that look, you know the one. The look that says maybe it's time to find a new fire keeper, preferably one who can actually contribute to putting food on the table. This is the moment. This is when Kra stands up, hobbles over to his latest wooden creation, and changes everything. The device he's built looks almost insultingly simple. It's basically a stick with a hook on one end and a handle on the other. Nothing fancy, nothing that screams revolutionary technology. If you saw it today, you might mistake it for a back-scratcher or some kind of primitive golf club. But when Kra demonstrates what this thing can do, the laughter dies in every throat around that fire. He places one of his hunting spears against the hook, draws his arm back in a motion that looks oddly familiar to anyone who's ever thrown a ball, and releases. The spear doesn't just fly, it soars. It cuts through the air with a velocity that makes everyone's previous throwing attempts look like gentle underhand tosses. More importantly, it flies straight and true, striking a practice hide they'd set up 60 paces away, twice the effective range of their strongest warrior. But here's the really mind-blowing part, the physics of what just happened. Kra's simple wooden hook has effectively given him a 3-foot extension to his arm. That might not sound like much, but in terms of lever mechanics, it's absolutely revolutionary. The device, we call it an atlatl today, from the Aztec word, multiplies the force of his throw by a factor of 3. 3 times the power, 3 times the range, 3 times the accuracy. Think about what this means. Suddenly, children can launch projectiles with the killing power of adult hunters. Women, traditionally excluded from big game hunting because they couldn't generate enough force to penetrate thick hide, can now participate fully in the hunt. The elderly, the injured, anyone with basic motor coordination can become a lethal long-range combatant. The tribal hierarchy that had existed for countless generations, the rigid pecking order based purely on physical strength, has just been turned upside down by a crippled firekeeper and his wooden hook. Within days, every member of the tribe is demanding their own atlatl. Within weeks, hunting success rates have tripled. Within months, neighboring tribes are sending delegations to learn the secret of the magic stick that makes spears fly like birds. And within a single generation, this simple innovation will spread across 3 continents, carried by traders and refugees and conquerors who understand they've witnessed something that changes the fundamental rules of survival. But here's what nobody around that fire could have possibly imagined. They weren't just watching the birth of a better hunting tool. They were witnessing the moment when human beings took their first real step toward technological dominance over the natural world. That crooked-legged hunter had just proven something that would echo through 40,000 years of human history, that brain could triumph over brawn, that innovation could overcome physical limitation, that the weakest member of the group might just be the one who changes everything. And if you think that's remarkable, wait until you hear what happened when these atlatl-armed humans encountered continents full of animals that had never seen a projectile weapon before. By 20,000 years before Christ, Krah's simple wooden hook had become something far more powerful than its humble inventor could have ever imagined. The atlatl wasn't just changing how humans hunted, it was rewriting the rules of what it meant to be human. Picture the scene at a Clovis site in what we now call New Mexico. Dawn is breaking over a landscape that looks like something from another planet, vast grasslands dotted with creatures that would make a modern zoo director's jaw drop. 13-foot-tall Colombian mammoths lumber across the plains, their tusks curving like ivory scimitars. Giant ground sloths the size of small cars browse on vegetation, while saber-toothed cats prowl the edges of the herds, waiting for weakness. Into this prehistoric paradise steps a hunting party of maybe 20 humans. They're carrying atlatl's refined versions of Krah's original design, crafted from carefully selected wood and decorated with bone and sinew. But here's what would shock you if you could time travel back to witness this hunt. These aren't all muscle-bound alpha males. The group includes women, teenagers, even a man who's clearly past his physical prime. The atlatl has democratized death. The lead hunter raises his atlatl, a dart nocked and ready. The projectile he's about to launch weighs maybe 4 ounces, but it's traveling at 150 kilometers per hour fast enough that the mammoth won't even hear it coming until it's already 6 inches deep in vital organs. The physics are absolutely devastating. That dart carries more kinetic energy than a modern crossbow bolt, with accuracy that would impress an Olympic archer. But here's where the story gets really interesting. These hunters aren't planning to charge the mammoth and duke it out mano a mano like their ancestors did. They've figured out something revolutionary. Why fight fair when you can fight smart? They've positioned themselves along a cliff edge, and they're about to turn this mammoth's own size and momentum against it. The hunt begins with a sound that would haunt the nightmares of Pleistocene megafauna for millennia. The distinctive whistle of atlatl darts cutting through the air. It's a noise unlike anything in nature, a high-pitched whine that speaks of human ingenuity and impending doom. The mammoths hear it and instinctively try to flee, but that's exactly what the hunters are counting on. Dart after dart finds its mark, not killing shots but carefully placed wounds designed to panic and disorient. The massive creatures stampede toward what looks like safety, the open grassland beyond the cliff. But 13-foot-tall mammoths aren't exactly built for precision stopping, and momentum is a harsh mistress. One by one, tons of prehistoric flesh tumble over the edge, ending up as pre-processed meals at the bottom of the ravine. This isn't hunting, as we traditionally think of it. This is warfare, systematic, calculated, technologically enabled warfare against species that have ruled this continent for millions of years. And it's working with terrifying efficiency. Different human cultures across the globe were developing their own unique adaptations of Krah's basic design, each reflecting the specific challenges of their environment. In the Arctic, Inuit peoples crafted miniature atlatls perfectly sized for launching from the cramped confines of a kayak. These specialized seal hunting versions could drive a harpoon through thick blubber at ranges that kept hunters safely away from those crushing jaws and powerful flippers. Down in Australia, Aboriginal peoples had created something called the woomera, a design so elegant it makes modern multi-tools look clunky. This wasn't just a spear thrower. It was a mixing bowl for preparing ochre paints, a fire-starting tool, a digging implement, and probably a dozen other functions that archaeologists are still figuring out. Talk about efficient packing for a nomadic lifestyle. In the dense forests of ancient Europe, hunters developed flexible atlatls that could bend around trees, allowing them to arc spears in trajectories that seemed to defy physics. Meanwhile, on the open savannas of Africa, specialized designs emerged for different prey, long, elegant models for fleet antelope, shorter, more robust versions for buffalo and other dangerous game. But perhaps the most revolutionary change wasn't technological, it was social. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice, what's now the Czech Republic, tells an amazing story. We find female skeletons buried with atlatls and dart points, their shoulder bones showing the distinctive wear patterns that come from years of regular use. These weren't ceremonial weapons or symbolic grave goods. These were working tools carried by women who participated fully in the hunt. Think about what this means for a moment. For hundreds of thousands of years, human societies had been organized around a simple principle: physical strength determined social hierarchy. The biggest, strongest males dominated hunting and warfare, while everyone else filled supporting roles. The atlatl shattered that paradigm. Suddenly, a woman or an elderly man could launch projectiles with more force than the tribe's strongest warrior could achieve with his bare hands. This democratization of lethal force triggered humanity's first population explosion. Tribes with atlatl technology could support 3 times as many people as those without. More food meant more children surviving to adulthood, which meant larger tribes, which meant more territory could be claimed and defended. The weapon became so central to survival that elaborate rituals emerged around its construction. Master craftsmen guarded their techniques like state secrets, passing knowledge through bloodlines in ceremonies that could last for days. Specific woods had to be cut only during certain moon phases. Bindings were made from the sinew of the first kill achieved with the weapon. Decorations told stories of legendary hunts, turning each atlatl into both tool and historical record. The social revolution was as profound as the technological one. Communities that had existed for generations were suddenly reshuffled as traditional power structures crumbled. The physically weakest member of the tribe might now be its most effective hunter. Children could contribute meaningfully to food procurement. The elderly, instead of being burdens, became valuable repositories of knowledge about atlatl construction and use. And this was just the beginning. Across 2 virgin continents, creatures that had never encountered projectile weapons were about to learn, too late, what human ingenuity could accomplish when combined with ruthless efficiency. The age of megafauna was ending, and the age of human dominance was about to begin. But first, the atlatl had to prove itself worthy of empire. Between 15,000 and 5,000 years before Christ, the atlatl reached its golden age, and the results were nothing short of apocalyptic, if you happen to be a large animal living in Australia or the Americas. Let's start with Australia, because what happened there reads like a science fiction nightmare. When the first humans arrived on that continent around 50,000 years ago, they found a landscape populated by creatures that would make Jurassic Park look like a petting zoo. Giant wombats the size of small cars, carnivorous kangaroos standing 3 meters tall with claws that could disembowel a horse, monitor lizards that dwarfed modern Komodo dragons, capable of bringing down prey as large as rhinoceros. These animals had ruled Australia for millions of years, perfectly adapted to their environment, apex predators with no natural enemies. They had never encountered projectile weapons. They had never faced an opponent that could kill from a distance. They were about to learn a hard lesson about the power of human innovation. The atlatl-armed humans who stepped onto Australian beaches didn't just hunt these creatures. They systematically exterminated them. Within 2,000 years of human arrival, 90% of large animal species had vanished forever. Think about that timeline for a moment. 2,000 years sounds like a long time to us, but in evolutionary terms, it's an eye blink. It's geological catastrophe compressed into the space of maybe 80 human generations. The Diprotodon, a marsupial the size of a hippopotamus, disappeared. The giant short-faced kangaroo, Procoptodon, vanished. Megalania, a monitor lizard that could grow to 7 meters in length, became extinct. One by one, Australia's megafauna fell to the whistle of atlatl darts launched by a species that had arrived on their continent just moments before, geologically speaking. But if Australia was the atlatl's proving ground, Mesoamerica became its cathedral. Here, the weapon transcended its role as a hunting tool to become something approaching religious significance. The Aztecs called it the Atlacotl, and in their hands, it became both instrument of war and symbol of divine authority. Picture an Aztec warrior training ground on the shores of Lake Texcoco in the early 1500s. Young men practiced their entire lives to master this weapon, beginning training in childhood with wooden darts and reed targets. But these aren't just any targets, they're floating gourds bobbing on the lake's surface, constantly moving, constantly challenging the shooter's ability to calculate trajectory, wind speed, and the target's motion. The master warriors can hit flying birds at 40 paces. Flying birds. Think about the hand-eye coordination, the understanding of physics, the sheer skill required to intercept a rapidly moving target in three-dimensional space using a projectile weapon. These weren't primitive savages throwing sticks at animals. These were precision marksmen whose abilities would impress modern Olympic competitors. Their atlatls weren't simple wooden sticks like Kra's original design. These were works of art, decorated with gold and turquoise, inlaid with obsidian and jade. The darts they launched weren't crude stone points, but obsidian blades so sharp they could slice through steel armor, so precisely crafted they could decapitate an enemy with surgical precision. When Hernán Cortés landed in 1519, his conquistadors discovered that their European military superiority was more tenuous than they'd imagined. At the Battle of Otumba in 1520, Spanish chroniclers recorded something that must have shaken them to their core. Aztec atlatl darts punching through steel breastplates at 50 meters, killing armored horses with single shots. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who fought alongside Cortés and later chronicled the conquest, wrote descriptions that read like battlefield reports from a much later era, darts that flew with such force they passed clean through 3 men. These weren't exaggerations or propaganda, they were the terrified observations of soldiers who had expected to face Stone Age primitives and instead encountered precision weapons that could outrange their crossbows and outpenetrate their armor. But the Aztecs weren't the only ones who had elevated the atlatl to an art form. The ancient Greeks incorporated atlatl competitions into their athletic festivals, calling the device an ancule. Greek champions achieved throws exceeding 200 meters distances that would be impressive even by modern standards. These competitions weren't casual entertainment, they were serious displays of military skill, because every Greek citizen soldier needed to be proficient with ranged weapons. Roman legions encountered atlatl-armed Germanic tribes who had developed their own tactical innovations. These warriors could launch volleys of darts from beyond pilum range, forcing the Romans to adapt their famous disciplined formations. Larger shields became necessary. Looser formations were required to minimize the damage from precision long-range fire. The very tactics that had conquered most of the known world had to evolve to counter a weapon that predated Rome by thousands of years. In North America, the basket-maker cultures of the Southwest had taken atlatl development in a completely different direction. They created what archaeologists call banner stones, precisely carved stone weights that attached to the atlatl shaft. These weren't just decorations. They were sophisticated engineering solutions that increased accuracy and range through gyroscopic stabilization. The physics involved are actually quite complex. The bannerstone acts as a flywheel, storing rotational energy and smoothing out minor variations in the thrower's release. It's the same principle that makes a spinning bullet more accurate than a tumbling one, applied to spear-throwing technology thousands of years before anyone understood the mathematics behind it. These southwestern cultures built entire cosmologies around the Atlatl. Their creator god was depicted holding one. Constellation patterns in their astronomy showed the great hunter's throwing stick among the stars. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a fundamental part of how they understood their place in the universe. But perhaps the most impressive Atlatl cultures were those that managed to maintain the technology's supremacy even as newer weapons emerged around them. In the Amazon basin, indigenous peoples discovered that the Atlatl could launch harpoons with lines attached, revolutionizing river fishing for giant arapaima and caiman. The weapon's superior power made it possible to drive barbed points through thick scales and heavy hide, while the line attachment meant that even a non-fatal hit could result in a successful capture. Australian Aboriginal peoples maintained unbroken Atlatl traditions for 50,000 years. 50,000 years of continuous technological development and refinement. Their woomeras were perfectly adapted for launching heavy spears through thick bush, where bow arrows would deflect harmlessly off branches. They could drive a spear through a crocodile's armored hide at ranges that kept hunters safely away from snapping jaws. These weren't static, unchanging societies clinging to obsolete technology. They were dynamic cultures that had found ecological niches where the Atlatl remained superior to any alternative. They understood something that took European military theorists centuries to figure out: that newer doesn't always mean better, and that the right tool for the job depends entirely on what the job actually is. By 5,000 years before Christ, the Atlatl had enabled humanity's conquest of 2 virgin continents and fundamentally altered the relationship between our species and the natural world. But change was coming. Somewhere in the grasslands of Central Asia, an unknown inventor was about to string the first bow, beginning the long twilight of the weapon that had given humans their first taste of technological dominance. Around 5,000 years before Christ, somewhere in the windswept grasslands of Central Asia, an unknown inventor made a discovery that would eventually doom the Atlatl to obsolescence. They strung the first bow. It's impossible to know exactly what prompted this breakthrough. Maybe it was watching a bent sapling snap back to position. Maybe it was observing how certain woods could store and release energy more efficiently than human muscle. What we do know is that this innovation began the long, slow decline of humanity's first precision weapon. The advantages of the bow were immediately obvious to anyone who tried it. Faster reload times: an experienced archer could loose 6 arrows in the time it took an Atlatl user to prepare and throw 2 darts. Easier portability: no need to carry multiple long spears when a quiver of arrows would suffice. More compact operation: you could use a bow effectively in dense forest or from horseback, situations where an Atlatl's overhead throwing motion was impractical. But here's what makes this technological transition fascinating. The Atlatl didn't just roll over and die. Like any successful technology facing obsolescence, it found niches where its unique advantages kept it competitive for thousands of years beyond what anyone might have predicted. Australian Aboriginal peoples maintained unbroken Atlatl traditions for 50,000 years. 50,000 years. Let that sink in for a moment. While European civilizations rose and fell, while entire empires turned to dust, while humanity invented agriculture, writing, metalworking, and gunpowder, Aboriginal Australians kept using and refining their woomeras, not because they were backward or isolated, but because for their specific hunting needs in their specific environment, the Atlatl remained superior to any alternative. Their woomeras were perfectly adapted for launching heavy spears through thick brush, where bow arrows would deflect harmlessly off branches and bark. They could drive a 4-foot spear clean through a saltwater crocodile's armored hide at ranges that kept hunters safely away from jaws that could snap a human in half. Try doing that with a bow and arrow. In the Amazon basin, indigenous peoples discovered applications for the Atlatl that no one else had ever considered. They used them to launch harpoons with lines attached, revolutionizing river fishing for giant arapaima fish that could grow to 4 meters in length and weigh more than a full-grown man. The Atlatl's superior power made it possible to drive barbed points through scales thick enough to turn knife blades, while the line attachment meant that even a non-fatal hit could result in a successful capture. But perhaps the most dramatic last stand of the Atlatl occurred in 16th century Mexico, where Aztec warriors faced Spanish conquistadors with weapons that were already ancient when Rome was founded. The results were far more competitive than European chroniclers wanted to admit. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who fought alongside Cortés and later wrote one of the most detailed accounts of the conquest, described Aztec Atlatl darts that flew with such force they passed clean through 3 men. These weren't primitive savages throwing sticks. These were master warriors using precision instruments of war that had been refined over thousands of years. At the siege of Tenochtitlan, Spanish soldiers discovered that their steel armor offered little protection against obsidian-tipped darts launched from atlatls. The volcanic glass blades were sharper than surgical steel, capable of cutting through chainmail and penetrating plate armor. More importantly, the atlatl could deliver these projectiles with enough force to drive them 6 inches into solid wood or through multiple layers of quilted armor. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Spanish soldiers had come to the New World expecting to face Stone Age primitives armed with clubs and crude spears. Instead, they encountered precision weapons that could kill at ranges beyond their crossbows, and with penetrating power that made their armor feel like paper. Even as gunpowder weapons spread across Europe, some military minds recognized the atlatl's potential for specialized applications. During World War I, French soldiers rediscovered the ancient weapon's utility for launching grenades beyond hand-throwing range. Improvised atlatls could achieve distances over 100 meters far enough to keep the thrower safely away from blast radius while delivering explosives with surprising accuracy. The Yupik peoples of Alaska used atlatls well into the 20th century for hunting from kayaks where firearms were impractical. The weapon's compact size and silent operation made it perfect for taking seals and walrus without alerting entire herds. A missed shot with a rifle meant empty hands and hungry families. A missed dart could be retrieved and tried again. But perhaps the most remarkable chapter in the atlatl's modern story comes from the work of experimental archaeologists and primitive skills enthusiasts who have spent decades rediscovering techniques that ancient peoples perfected through generations of practice. Modern champions like Bob Berg have achieved distances exceeding 260 meters, nearly 3 football fields. Their darts travel at velocities approaching 170 kilometers per hour, carrying kinetic energy comparable to modern crossbow bolts. In accuracy competitions, skilled atlatl users regularly outperform compound bow archers at ranges up to 50 meters. The World Atlatl Association hosts competitions where participants demonstrate grips and release methods that were lost for millennia, only to be painstakingly reconstructed through trial and error. These modern practitioners have discovered that the ancient weapon's learning curve is deceptively steep. Basic competence can be achieved in hours, but true mastery requires years of dedicated practice. What they've rediscovered is something that Kra understood 30,000 years ago, sitting by his fire with a crippled leg and too much time to think, that human innovation can overcome physical limitation, that the weakest member of the group might be the one who changes everything. That brain will always triumph over brawn, given enough time and motivation. The atlatl's 40,000-year reign as humanity's primary ranged weapon represents more than just technological development. It represents proof of concept for something much larger. The idea that humans could use tools not just to supplement their natural abilities, but to transcend them entirely. Kra's simple wooden hook didn't just change how humans hunted. It fundamentally altered the balance of power between human ingenuity and natural selection, launching our species on a trajectory toward technological dominance that continues today. Every time you use a tool to accomplish something your bare hands couldn't manage, you're following a path that began with one injured hunter's refusal to accept the limitations imposed by his physical disability. The profound lesson echoes across 40,000 years. Innovation, not physical superiority, would shape our species' destiny. The atlatl was humanity's first precision weapon, our first force multiplier, our first proof that we could engineer our way out of evolutionary constraints, and in a world where we're still engineering our way out of constraints, where we're still using our brains to overcome our physical limitations, where we're still proving that the person with the best idea might just change everything. Maybe the Atlatls story isn't really finished after all. Maybe it's just beginning.